whenever I'm standing in for Mike Graham, my favourite part of the week comes early in the week on a Monday. It's when the excellent Peter Hitchens from the Mail on Sunday comes in to discuss what he wrote in his column yesterday and indeed other issues. Welcome, Peter.
Good morning. I've just realised I could be a pensioner causing anxiety.
Yes, indeed, and I've called the police and you will be arrested very soon.
As if they're not busy on something else, of course.
Well, patrolling the tweets, of course. Now, in your column yesterday, you wrote about a chap called Graham Phillips. He's a video blogger, not perhaps the most laudable of people, but he's a British citizen, and he's been placed on the Ukraine war sanctions list, and frankly, it has ceased his ability to be able to exist as a normal person. He can't pay any of his bills. He's had all of his money seized. Explain how he came to this pretty pass.
Well, as I say, I don't particularly like Mr. Phillips, and I've told him so, as it were, to his face in an email exchange, and he understands this. But he's been attempting to be a sort of a journalist out in Ukraine, and a lot of the stuff that he's done has greatly upset the Ukrainian authorities. He's done things. A particular thing I must say here that I actively disliked was his questioning of a badly wounded Ukrainian prisoner of war, which seemed to me to be extremely unpleasant. And again, I told him this, but the fact remains that all he's actually been doing, if it's a criminal offence, then if anybody wants to proceed against him, then let them do so. And I won't be in any way protesting against that. If they want to do that, take him to court, let him make his own case, if he has done anything which is a crime. But what's happened to him is he's been severely punished by the British state without any due process at all. He's never been arrested, charged, tried, given any opportunity to defend himself. And this sanctioning, which is, if you look at the lists of people who are sanctioned, which are published on the internet, it's generally colonels in the Syrian army or governors of Russian regions or people accused of money laundering. It's not former civil servants with mortgages on houses in London, living partly in this country and partly abroad, who are not particularly rich and are not terrorists or money launderers. And the legislation, when it was put through in 2018, was never stated as likely to be targeted at British citizens. Yet here we have it. He suddenly appeared on this list, and as a result, his bank account's frozen. He can't pay anybody anything because they're not allowed to accept money from him. Nobody can pay him. Even if he wanted to go and attend some court hearing or trial, he'd be hard put to get there because he can't buy a ticket, and no one can take any money for it. He's been basically turned into an unperson. If you've read the extraordinary novel *The Trial* by Franz Kafka, the classic about oppression, he's in the situation of somebody in a Kafka novel. There's no way in which he can turn. Now, there are 2 points here. One is Graham Phillips himself. People may have and do have strong views about him and may not like what he does, but that's not the point. Oppressive laws are often tested by being used against people who are not very likable. As the great Supreme Court Justice in the United States, Felix Frankfurter, said, a lot of civil liberties issues concern men who are not very much liked. But this one is very serious. He faces state punishment by the government, by his own government, and has absolutely no way of appealing against it or bringing it to an end, and has gone through no sort of due process. This seems to me to be straightforwardly oppressive. Basically, they've done it because they don't like what he says. And arguably, his offence is journalism. Well, you could say. I mean, if you look at the actual charge against him, I haven't got the detailed wording with me in front of me here. It's quite long and verbose, but basically, he's accused of saying things which might destabilise the government of Ukraine. Well, quite frankly, I could be accused of the same thing. It's a complete catch-all, vague charge, which of the sort which Stalin used at his show trials in the 1930s. If people say, well, we really, really support Ukraine because we're against the oppressive nature of Russia and the despotic nature of the Putin regime, who is not, then they have to ask themselves, can you fight against a despotic regime by using despotic methods? And I say no. And also, I mean,
I'm not saying that I do, but surely I would have the right, as a British citizen, to say, well, I firmly support Russia and I can't stand Ukraine. What we're learning from the case of Graham Phillips is that the government might take an extremely dim view of that and start punishing me.
Well, this is all, and we're not actually at war with Russia. We still have an embassy in Moscow functioning. We still have there's still a Russian embassy in London. We still have diplomatic relations. We're not at war. This isn't a situation where giving aid and comfort to the enemy would become an offence. So, yeah, exactly. If somebody might say that Russia has a case, or that Ukraine is not above criticism, then that's not an offence against anything at the moment. And yet, the government is behaving as if we were at war, and as if dissent was treachery. Now, it's exactly that behaviour, the idea that dissenting from the government view is treachery, which rules in Russia. That's what they lock people up for there.
If you want to hear the sound of cutlery crashing onto plates, do what I do in North London dinner parties and say, I stand with Russia, because there is an orthodoxy here. I don't stand with Russia, by the way, but this is punishment due to an orthodoxy that the government is demanding.
It's punishment. It's basically punishment for having the wrong opinion. In the way that it's been formulated, if you look at the actual charge of supposedly destabilising or damaging Ukraine, well, he hasn't been going around doing anything military to Ukraine. What he's been doing has been deploying video and words in a way which the Ukrainian government doesn't like. Well, I don't blame them for not liking it, but that's not the point. Until this happened, I think you could generally say that British people could assume that they could say what they liked, provided it wasn't actual incitement to violence, and they were free to do it. But this is not the case here, and they say no trial, no arrest, no verdict, no jury, just out of the blue, a punishment which makes his life virtually unlivable. I think it's shocking. I think more people should be worried about it.
Yeah, sinister, and it shouldn't be happening here. Another item in your column of interest: TV cameras will damage justice. We covered here last week, live on this show, the very first televised verdict being broadcast live to the nation. Very unsavoury case of a paedophile who killed his grandfather. I thought they could have chosen a slightly more uplifting case. However, you feel, I mean, my feeling on this is, if we are to stick by that phrase, justice must not only be done, it must be seen to be done. What's wrong with seeing it on television? But you take an opposing view.
Well, seeing it on television turns it into a great national drama, and it brings the volatility of often quite ill-informed opinion into the court case. When I was working as a correspondent in the United States, I found myself, to my total amazement, covering the Bobbitt case, in which John Wayne Bobbitt's
his wife cut off his manhood, as they say in police.
She did. And there were two trials, one of her for doing that and one of him for alleged marital or sexual assault. And I attended both of them, and hers was televised because it was a crime of violence. His was not televised because it was a sex crime. The difference in the atmosphere in the court between the two was astonishing.
Really?
Oh yeah, one was sort of almost a melodrama, and the other one was a normal trial. In both cases, actually, they were acquitted of the crime, but the difference between the two was huge, and everybody in the courtroom of the televised trial was plainly influenced by the fact they knew that millions of people were watching this. How anyone can pretend that they wouldn't be, I don't know. So they show a picture, first of all, of the judge passing sentence. But why do they do this if they're not preparing us for more?
It must be more.
It can't be just done for the sake of showing us a judge.
There's no point in just
the next thing it'll be there'll be film of a jury delivering its verdict, and then there'll be some film of the prosecution.
You have to see the defendant, for God's sake. I couldn't understand why the defendant was spared his moment of shame.
Well, I mean, I can, because it would. I think that there would have been serious difficulties probably in law in doing it. But this is what it seems to me to be perfectly obvious. The whole thing is aimed at jamming the thin end of the wedge in and gradually increasing the coverage of trials. Now, I believe that trials which are televised will be trials which will be unfair, and I think it will be a disaster. I think television has destroyed Parliament, by the way. I was going to ask you. Nothing good has come from the televising of Parliament. You get this ridiculous organised barracking and the fake hostility and fake melodrama of Prime Minister's questions. Most of the important things that Parliament does are never televised because they're so boring. And it gives people a chance to grandstand and to make themselves look as if they're what they're not. And also, as I say, the organised barracking during Prime Minister's questions is just absurd. If people want to cheer and shout, that's all very well, but it should be spontaneous. And I think there's something fundamentally phony about it, and it's entirely the result of the televising, which has happened in my lifetime. And I remember when I was a reporter down at Parliament before it was televised, and it was a totally different body from what it is now, and it was a better body than it is now, and that's the other thing. But people must understand that there's a price to be paid for putting things on television.
Yes, and I see what you're saying is that if you televise a court case as they do in America in their entirety, you see the jury, you see the lawyers, you see the defendant, then the lawyers in particular start behaving as if they're in a TV drama. Yeah. So presumably our barristers, and they will expand the remit, there's no doubt about that, but our barristers will start acting like they're in Rumpole of the Bailey.
The effect on the jurors and on the judge will be huge. The judge will be far more recognisable than judges normally are outside court, which is a danger, it seems to me. The jurors who may not be shown, it would be grave danger if jurors were actually shown on television, but everybody who knows them will know that they're involved in this case, and they will be under pressure from public opinion, which jurors should not be.
I mean, I absolutely accept what you're saying. I'm kind of torn about it, though, because I just do feel that the public have a right to see affairs of state. They have a right to see justice.
Courtrooms are not closed. You can go.
Yeah, but I'll tell you
what I would say, which is that the newspapers have the decline of local newspapers, particularly, means that the coverage of court cases in this country is pathetic compared with what it was when I started out in journalism nearly 50 years ago. We used to cover the courts.
I used to spend the first 2 hours of every day covering magistrate courts in Wimbledon.
It just is not done properly anymore, and but it's perfectly possible to do. Nobody will stop you, but there are rules about covering courts, about what you can and what you cannot say about it, and the way in which you do it. And fair and accurate report of court is quite a difficult thing to do, and you need a lot of experience and training to do it properly. Television, I think, will just simply undermine that. And there are public galleries; you can go there if you want to see it, and the trials are not closed. But putting a television camera in there is completely different.
It certainly will be a game changer. Stay with us, Peter, and we'll resume this conversation after these messages. I'm Kevin O'Sullivan. I'm with Peter Hitchens, the Mail on Sunday columnist. This is Talk TV, live from the Talk Radio studios. Welcome back. I'm talking to Peter Hitchens, the Mail on Sunday columnist. We're going to get on to an amazing piece he's written for the Compact magazine about the railways in just a minute. But I can't help returning to your column just for one last brief chat about a little item you wrote about wearing ties. Now, in line with sartorial rules here at Talk TV, here I am in my tie, but this apparently, according to the French, makes me right-wing or something?
Well, there is a row in the French Parliament at the moment in which right-wingers are insisting that male members of Parliament wear ties, and the left-wing members are resisting this. And the main and wonderful result has been that the female members of Parliament have started wearing ties.
That's a good idea.
As a satirical response. It was a lovely picture of some of them all turning up with their ties on. I pointed out that actually ties seem to be mainly an item of clothing which dangles into your food, and then you can't afford to clean it. And why wear this strangling garment anyway? It's one of the strangest items of clothing I've ever come across, but it was just an opportunity for me to have a go at ties, really. I don't like them.
I can see that.
You can see that, yeah.
I rather like ties, but
people do. I mean, I don't go around telling people not to wear them. But for large parts of my life, I've been confronted by people who say, "No, you've got to wear a tie." Yeah,
you accumulate a lot over the years, because I haven't really worn a tie for quite a few years until Talk Radio became Talk TV, so on the telly. So wear a tie. So I returned to my tie rack, and I thought, my my God, and I counted them. I got about 156.
Yeah, most of them in need of dry cleaning because
with
the gravy got under them.
With various memories of various dinners all over them.
Medals, as they used to be called, I think, yeah.
Indeed. Now, let's talk about this piece that you wrote for Compact. It's called The Attack on Rail. To some extent, it dates back to Beecham's attack on the railway system, where he closed so many stations.
Don't blame Dr. Beeching, really. He did the report, but he was put up to it by the appalling Ernest Marples, who was the transport minister at the time.
But an act of national vandalism.
It was an act of national vandalism, and it ought to be. Everyone goes on about the Profumo scandal. Everybody knows or thinks they know about the Profumo scandal because it had sex in it. But the Marples scandal is just as big. It also had sex in it, by the way. I'm not going to go into the details of it here. But Marples, while he was Minister of Transport, was a director of and had large shareholdings in a company building motorways.
Really?
Yeah. And when there was some vague disquiet expressed about this, he sold all his shares to his wife, Mrs. Marples. So that was okay. He ended his career, and this is an amazing thing, which is very widely unknown. He ended his career shortly after he was made a peer by skipping the country.
Really?
He skipped the country. Quite amusingly, he skipped the country by train on the old night ferry to Paris because he put all his possessions in the guard's van and took them down to his chateau in Beaujolais. He was trying to escape, unsuccessfully as far as I know, escaped a large tax bill. And this was a major Tory politician, and nobody knows that this is how his career ended.
I'm tempted to say they don't make politicians like that anymore.
Well, let's hope not.
They certainly did in the 1970-74. John Stonehouse, ITV are making a drama about that. Look forward to seeing that. Let's get back to the railways, though. We're talking about, essentially, the railways were diminished because the politicians of that era felt railways were finished. Everyone would have a car now. This was the new.
I think
form
that was, but there was that, and there was also a very, very strong road building lobby and a very strong motorcar lobby, and they triumphed in politics. They still do, in my view. We have a Ministry of Transport, but really it's a Ministry of Roads, Cars and Lorries. It views our railway heritage as an embarrassment and a nuisance. And every so often these plans come up to cut the railways back almost to nothing. They never give up. And they would love to get rid of them. And I'm quite worried that the current strikes which are taking place might be used as a pretext for that, because the railways are in big trouble after the Great Panic. Huge numbers of people were frightened out of using them. They've lost an enormous amount of traffic, and the government subsidised them very heavily with funny money. But now that's come to an end. And I'm just worried that the unions are going to be blamed for what has in fact been a series of very foolish policies, including privatisation, which has led us to this mess. Bizarre thing is a recent biography of British Rail shows that it was a very well-run company and was actually extremely well managed up to the point of privatisation, despite the huge dislike of railways in the actual government.
I think I've got this right.
It's Christian Wolmar's book.
That Keir Starmer has abandoned his pledges to nationalise many industries, but still may nationalise the railway industry. Would that be a good thing?
Well, half the job's been done for it. It would be a good thing. They should never have been privatised. Half the job's been done for it because Network Rail has become willy-nilly now a state-owned company. It took them a long time to admit it, and more of the franchises on the actual rail operating companies have collapsed and have had to go back into state control because actually these franchises don't work. Never have worked, and so it's a half-done job before he actually gets the chance to do it, if he does.
What is the future for transport in this country? Because we're at this strange point where, although contrary to the situation back in the early 60s, when the government decided everyone will soon have cars, now everyone does have a car, and yet there is this war on motorists.
Well, they can't make up their minds, can they? They bow to green dogma, but at the same time they design the country around the car. I mean, if particularly this is the case for women who are compelled to go out to work by the current social pressure and the way in which it's generally assumed women must go out to work, every family must have two incomes. To do what they do, to take the children to nursery or to school, to do the shopping, to come home, it can't be done by public transport. In almost no city in the country is it possible, actually, to get around by public transport. Outside London, where it's exceptional, it's very, very poor. And if you say to people, you must stop using your car, we're going to block off all the side roads, we're going to tax you heavily, we're going to put speed bumps everywhere, we're going to have 15-mile-an-hour speed limits, all you do is make people angry, because actually they have no choice but to use their cars. They're not using their cars because they especially want to, but because the whole country is designed to make it impossible to do anything unless you use a car. It's completely and utterly schizophrenic. I'm sorry, I shouldn't use that term. It's completely and utterly contradictory.
I know what you mean.
To use. I feel more and more sensitive about using it, actually. It's just completely and utterly contradictory and thoughtless to simultaneously punish people for driving cars and to build a country which is pretty much designed around the use of cars.
And if you think about Sadiq Khan is planning to, in his low-traffic neighbourhood mania, is planning to turn, I think it's something like 6 square miles of central London into pedestrian-only areas. Now, my feeling about that is, great, save the planet and all that, but what about the businesses within that area? How do they get deliveries? How do they dispatch their goods?
Yeah, I'm sure you could come up with arrangements, but my example in this is in Switzerland, which takes public transport seriously. What they first of all do is they revolutionise public transport, so that you can get it. Businessmen in Zurich leave their Mercedes at home because the trams are so good and so cheap and so fast and reliable. We don't have that here. Our public transport is never going to persuade anyone to leave their cars behind. I'm sure you get. But then people often look at the example of the Netherlands. They say, well, the Netherlands, but they assume that the Netherlands are like that because the Dutch are so sensible. Actually, until the late 1950s. The Netherlands were going exactly the same way we were, but a very, very strong decision was taken to go for more and better public transport, encouragement of cycling and walking. It takes years to do, but it needs somebody to really put some muscle behind it to make it happen.
Well, Peter, good point to end on. Thank you so much for your time. Great to see you, as always. Peter Hitchens, Mail on Sunday columnist there. I'm Kevin O'Sullivan. This is talkTV, live from the Talk Radio studios.